Welcome to Le Grande Bouffe.
The Big Feast.
With myself, Cole Smithey, and my co-host, Mike Lacy. And this week with our special co-host, Phil Hall.
That's me.
Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
So, Phil brought up... Well, we should talk a little bit about Phil's latest book because the movie that we're doing, of course, it's a mad world.
Is that the right number? Did he get that
No,
right?
he had one mad too many. It's only 4 mads.
Oh, I always thought it was 5.
No,
Okay, good. It's a mad world.
that's right.
Is that the preferred, like, that speed? Is that sort of
It's your show. You could do what you want.
So Phil has a new book out, and this movie shows up in that book. So Phil, we want to hear about your book.
The book is called In Search of Lost Films, and as the title would suggest, it is a search for lost films, not only movies that have completely disappeared forever, but scenes and segments from classic films that were cut out either before release or right after the release and have gone into the ether. And one of the films that is cited is Stanley Kramer's 1963 epic, It's a Mad World, which originally began its life as a 4-hour and 1-minute film and then was cut down to about 210 minutes, then to 192 minutes, then to 154 minutes. All that remains is the 154-minute version, which went into general release. The longer version, that 192, was the Roadshow release, which played from about November 1963 to the spring of 1964. There is no extant print of that at all. An effort had been made to reconstruct the Roadshow film, and that was on the recent Criterion Collection release of the film. But when you stop and realize it, I mean, that was 1963 is what, 52, 53 years ago, and it's gone forever? It's almost unthinkable that a movie made relatively recently does not exist in its original extant form. But then with motion pictures going all the way back to the 1890s and almost as recent as the 1970s, there are plenty of films that have completely vanished.
Well, I find that infuriating. And, you know, when it comes to beer, a lot of people find pumpkin beer to be infuriating. They get really mad about it.
I liked your segue there, Cole. It's
Thanks,
almost
Mike.
like you were incorporating some feedback that we both independently got that the beer maybe should be tied somewhat to the movie we're doing.
To the movie. And so I know a lot of people just hate pumpkin beer. And so I don't know about people hating this movie. I think that there's always conjecture when it comes to this movie about the definition of screwball comedy. I think it's funny that one of the characters says the word screwball early in the movies. So to me, it's an epic screwball comedy is how I look at it. But I want to talk about the beer a little bit because it's the Dogfish Head, say it right, pumpkin ale.
Like a punk? Like a...
That's right, pumpkin.
Yeah.
Like
Sid Vicious.
Like you be punkin', Holmes.
Okay.
So are we being punked by having this beer? What's the...
No.
I like pumpkin ale, to be honest.
This is a new release. It just came out. I just saw it in the store for the first time. When I purchased it, it's a 7% alcohol. It's got a crazy artwork on it. I like it's got a demonic skeleton.
Okay, yes, there is a sort of like a Mexican Day of the Dead skeleton.
Exactly.
Touching a pumpkin.
With a pumpkin.
And a couple of skulls around him.
A jack-o'-lantern.
Oh,
Definitely. And
A couple
this
of jack-o'-lanterns.
Bates Motel type thing in the background there.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, there's the Bates Motel. It's the Bates Mansion back there, actually.
Yeah, the mansion. Thank you for... Yeah,
That's okay.
there, yeah.
It's part of the Dogfish Seasonal Arts series, and Drew Millward appears to be the artist for this crazy-looking label.
I think we recently had a Dogfish Head, and I talked about visiting the brewery, so I don't need to this time, because I talked about that previously.
And you know, and now you did, actually. It says pumpkin ale is a full-bodied brown brewed with real pumpkin brown sugar, allspice, cinnamon, and nutmeg. And I will fess up and say, it's not my favorite. I'm enjoying drinking it with you guys, but this is not my favorite.
Do you like any pumpkins? There are some, and we're just getting to the season where they pop out again, so I forget which ones I liked, but kind of the more full-blown into the pumpkin flavor, the more I can get into it, and it feels like a Harry Potter drink, whereas it's just kind of a lager, and you're like, what's that flavor? And you realize it's pumpkin. I'm not as big a fan.
I'm a little mad, frankly,
You're not into this.
I'm a little mad, and I think we have to talk about this mad movie.
Oh, we segued back to the film then.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's how segues work.
Okay.
So yeah, do you want to jump in the history of this?
I want to dissect which version it is that you and I watched, because Mike and I tracked down the Criterion.
It's definitely the longest version in existence that I know of. It's 3 hours and 18 minutes.
Give or take. That's the one with the where they have some pictures but no sound and sound but no pictures.
And,
Exactly.
That's the reconstruction of the
Chinese
roadshow.
appears.
Yes.
At a certain point.
And that's the reconstructed version. Robert A. Harris was responsible for that.
I was surprised. I have to say I was very disappointed at a number of things. There was a lot of stuff where the color was off, where they could have color corrected, and you wonder why they go to the trouble of putting this all together and not color correcting. Where they
Part of that is the expense, because the film was shot in the Ultra Panavision 70 millimeter format. So in some cases the materials did not exist, and as they said, you have the subtitles, so they got that from a Japanese Laserdisc version. So they did the best they could in trying to bring the film back to the way it supposedly had looked, but there were portions where they weren't able to get it up to speed, so to speak.
Do you know anything on and I imagine since your book is about the long history of films that are missing pieces, how did these films actually go missing? You think someone would have stashed these in a garage, or the studio would be keeping these on ice for years?
Well, quite the opposite. In the case of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, that was released by United Artists, and United Artists had a policy that if footage was cut out of a movie, either prior to release or in this case after the roadshow for a new, smaller, general release version, the footage was junked. They kept it for a year, and if there was no further use for it, they threw it out. So that's what happened in the case of It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World. Also, another United Artists release, which is mentioned in the book In Search of Lost Films, is the Beatles movie Help. And there was a segment with the Beatles and the British comic Frankie Howard. And that scene was cut out of the film and was thrown away because United Artists had no use for it. This is back way before home video and the whole deleted scenes and director's cut concept came into being. So film was just seen as a disposable commodity. And going all the way back, entire films vanished pretty much for the same reason. They were not perceived to have any more commercial value, so it was expensive to store them. In many cases, they were stored improperly, so the films deteriorated, or if they were on nitrate film in a very hot room, they would burst into flames.
They were dangerous.
It was dangerous, yes.
Inglourious Basterds taught me that.
Yeah.
Well, so I've seen the shorter version. How long is that one? The normal version?
That's 154 minutes, and in many ways, that's superior to the longer version.
Yeah, I thought it was superior, and I kept scratching my head because I would see these scenes where the color was off register, and I still thought, well, but it feels like I've already seen this. So it didn't really, aside from a few of the still photos of Buster Keaton with just the audio, most of the stuff felt like I had already seen it in the shorter version.
That's why it was easy for Stanley Kramer and United Artists to cut the longer version down for general release, because a lot of the stuff that cut out, quite frankly, wasn't all that stellar. There were two significant plot changes in the film that did suffer when the film got cut. One was the Buster Keaton sequence, where he has a long phone conversation with Spencer Tracy. Tracy is going to abscond with the stolen money, and he's plotting with Keaton to get out of the country. And earlier in the film, there's a scene where Dick Shawn steals a car belonging to Barry Chase. Now, in the shorter version, you just assume that he's hanging out with her, and then he jumps into his car and goes off onto this crazy chase. But in the longer version, he actually takes her car, and it turns out that she's a married woman having an affair with him. So there's a little bit more of a plot to his background, and that got jettisoned when the film became shorter.
So let's just set up the story a little bit. The beginning of the movie is really outrageous, and we should of course mention that this movie is a who's who of comedians of that era, because everybody who was anybody in A-list comedy is in this movie. Spencer Tracy, of course, Milton Berle, Sid Caesar, Buddy Hackett, Ethel Merman. I have a funny Ethel Merman story. Mickey Rooney, Dick Shawn, Phil Silvers, Terry Thomas. I mean, the list just goes on and on. Jonathan Winters is amazing. Love Jonathan
Keaton.
Winters.
Buster Keaton, Jerry Lewis for a tiny segment.
The Three Stooges are in it. Jack Benny.
Is Groucho in it?
Groucho was considered for the film, but he was asking for too much money. There were actually a lot of famous names that were approached, and either they wanted too much money or their schedules didn't allow them to be in the film, or there were contractual problems that prevented them from coming in. And among the people who were approached who couldn't do the film were Bob Hope. Stan Laurel was asked to do the film. Groucho was one person. Judy Garland was supposed to be in the film. The characters played originally, it was supposed to be Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney were going to have the roles that Sid Caesar and Edie Adams had. But Judy Garland was doing her TV series at the time and couldn't do it.
And of course, the great Jimmy Durante, the schnoz. And Jimmy Durante drives his car off of a cliff at the beginning of the movie. And there's no way anyone could have survived this this fall from such a great height in this convertible. But he's hanging on to life, and a bunch of people that are driving behind him, this motley crew of characters, all jump down and run down to see if the guy's okay or if they could save him. And he tells them of this money, $350,000 in loot that he has hidden. And where has he hidden it?
In Santa Rosita Beach under a big W.
Big W.
But now Santa Rosita Beach, that's fictional, right?
It's fictional, yes.
That's fictional. But they do talk about Silver Strand Beach, and now that's just south of Oxnard near Point Wainimi, and I love Silver Strand Beach. So I thought it was funny that they mentioned Silver Strand. That is a real location.
So it's almost difficult for me to sum up this movie without referring to one of the movies that was a knockoff of it. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was one of the first of these chase comedies, but like there's so many movies like the Cannonball Run and Rat Race. Rat Race is virtually a remake of it. Did this launch this sort of mini genre?
It did. Actually, 2 years after the film debuted, there were two other big all-star chase movies. There was The Great Race with Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis, and the British film...
Blake Edwards, right?
Blake Edwards. And the British film Those Magnificent Men and Their Flying Machines came out. There was also Monte Carlo and Bust with Tony Curtis and Dudley Moore. And there was a whole spat of all-star comedy films that came out during the era. The Wrong Box came out, Guide to the Married Man. And anytime you have an all-star comedy film, It's a Mad, 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 Mad World is the foundation of that particular genre.
There's something like the biblical epics, The Greatest Story Ever Told, that this is hearkening to, but in a comedy perspective, right? Where you cut away to John Wayne and he's delivers some terrible line as a centurion.
Yeah.
This is sort of the more successful version of those grand epics.
I actually reviewed that, and I had said that Greatest Story Ever Told was the ecumenical version of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World.
Which came out first?
Mad World came out first.
There you go. So, like, all right, I'm thinking Mad World, Jerusalem, year 0.
Yeah. Well, both films were actually shot in the what had been called the single-screen Cinerama process. It was actually Ultra Panavision 70. So, in a way, watching it today on a TV screen or a laptop, you're seeing these films at a disadvantage. They were meant to be seen on a huge screen in special presentations, complete with intermissions and souvenir books.
And that's how this film was treated with the Roadshow.
Yes, it was the Roadshow.
Roadshow release. And so the funny thing is that there really isn't an antagonist per se in this movie, unless you count Ethel Merman.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I can say that too. Yeah, I hate Ethel Merman in this so
And because she's such a screeching harpy. And what's funny to me, of course, is I have an Ethel Merman story that I'm going to lay on you in about 1 second. But Ethel Merman was a great singer, and that was her. She did a lot of Broadway, and she was a belter. I mean, she had a big voice and a great voice. And so to me, it's funny to see her in this movie where she's the de facto antagonist, because my dad, when I was a freshman in high school, was probably 14, he was a Mason, and he was putting on this variety show in Williamsburg, Virginia. And it was a 3-night, my dad was a professional magician, And he was friends with people like Al Hurt and Celeste Holm and Ethel Merman
So
and
were you-
Sam
were you-
Cooke.
were you in Colonial Williamsburg?
He just knew, like, because he was a magician, he was in the entertainment world, and so he knew certain entertainers, and Ethel Merman was one, and so we had the suite right across from her suite at the hotel because she was doing this performance for my dad. And so I would ride every night in the limo, and I'd sit beside Ethel Merman, and she was just the sweetest lady and treated me like I was her own flesh and blood, just a really sweet person. So I have somewhere floating around, I have an autographed picture of her where she's got the classic opera pose, and she's wearing a black dress, so all you see is the head and the hand. But yeah, Ethel Merman is she's the wench you love to hate in this movie, but she was a great person in real life.
They use every square inch of her lungs in this movie. She belts it out.
Oh,
like it's
Puccini. She's just so loathsome, and even though the climax of the movie does it involve some retribution, it still doesn't seem like enough.
Yeah. And it's funny, she got the film because Rosalind Russell got the film role for Gypsy, which was Merman's big Broadway triumph. And had Merman done the film version of Gypsy, she would not have done this movie because they were both made simultaneously.
Oh, interesting.
Were there a lot of actors in this who had not stepped outside of television that much? Like, how much
Yes.
was Phil Silvers and Sid Caesar?
Well,
in film?
Jonathan Winters made his movie acting debut with this film. And it's really, it's quite a debut, too. A lot of people think that he was the funniest of the core comics in this. Dick Shawn was not very well known as a film actor. He did about 2 or 3 films that were not very well seen, so this was his biggest film role to date. Sid Caesar, I think he did 1 or 2 films prior to this, but he was not a film comic. Actually, except for Mickey Rooney, Spencer Tracy, and Peter Falk, none of the core cast were known as film actors. They were primarily known from television. Ethel Merman from Broadway, and Eddie Anderson from playing the Rochester role on Jack Benny's radio and TV show.
And Peter Falk from Broadway too, right?
Yeah, but Peter Falk was coming off 2 Oscar nominations. So he was in, he had gotten that for Murder Incorporated and Pocket Full of Miracles. So at the time, he was a fast-rising film star.
And I love Sid Caesar in this movie. I think he's so funny. He's just, this is the kind of movie where you're really going to pick some favorites. Of course, Jonathan Winters, everything he does is hilarious. Buddy Hackett, to me, how can you look at Buddy Hackett and not smile?
My number 1 is Phil Silvers. I love everything that he's doing, and so I'm not.
He's also got an advantage because he's wearing the black suit and the nerdy.
That's the
glasses.
brown suit, actually.
Oh, it's brown.
It's brown. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Adjust your color on.
Okay.
On your Ultra Panavision screen that you're watching this on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He is great. Phil Silvers is awesome.
Let's talk about maybe how enduring the comedy is. Do we still find it super funny nowadays? I'll be our token millennial. I want to hear your guys' thoughts, and then I'll give my thoughts on how enduring the jokes are and the style of comedy.
Well, I first saw the film, I was about 7 or 8 years old, and it was on, I think, NBC on New Year's Eve. And for a while in the 70s, this was a TV tradition. That film would be shown every New Year's. And as a child back in the 70s, this was heaven. This was like a Bugs Bunny cartoon come to life with so many wacky people hitting each other, jumping off cliffs, Ethel Merman getting her dress up over her head. It's just, what kid couldn't love that? And as time went by as an adult, I never lost interest in the film. I've get to appreciate more how the film was created in terms of the sound effects, which won the Academy Award. For Stanley Kramer's direction, because you don't think of Kramer as, certainly he was not a comedy director. The film he made prior to this was Judgment at Nuremberg, which is about as far away from It's a Mad, 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 Mad World as possible. And yet he kept the pace going, maybe more so in the shorter version, which is a lot faster than the Roadshow version, which does drag in time. But he was also not considered to be an epic director. A lot of his best work was these smaller chamber films, very intense dramas like On the Beach or The Defiant Ones. So here he's working on this huge California landscape with a giant cast, with special effects that were really unprecedented for the time, not just car chases, but also airplane tricks as well. And I just watched the film actually a few days ago prior to this show just to refresh myself, and it never bored me. I can watch this film over and over again, either the shorter version or the longer version, and I'm still enchanted by it, and I still find stuff that I hadn't even considered before. You even look at even more quiet performances like Dorothy Provine, who played Milton Berle's wife and Ethel Merman's daughter in the film. She's sort of like the straight man for the film. And it's a beautiful, touching performance, particularly when she's the first one to realize where the money is buried. And she's hoping that if she could dig this up, she could use the money to buy her way into a convent just to get away from all these crazy people.
Is it her or is it Sid Caesar's wife, the actress? I was reading one of those two actresses. Their husband was a comedian who was cast in the role originally, and then he died.
That was Edie Adams. She played Sid Caesar's wife. Her husband was Ernie Kovacs, and that's been a rumor that's been floating around for a long time. He wasn't cast in that part. They may have cast him in something else, or maybe just do a gag appearance, but he was not intended for that role. And that's also one of the things with this film too. There's been a lot of rumors floating around for years over who was supposed to be in the film. There was a rumor that Groucho Marx was supposed to play the Ethel Merman part as Milton Berle's father-in-law, but that's not true. Online for the longest time, the Internet Movie Database insisted that Howard Da Silva was in the film but was cut out. He had nothing to do with the film at all. And some people have located home movie footage from the production, and they saw old-time vaudeville comic Herbie Faye in the footage, and they think, oh, well, Herbie Faye must have been in the film, and he got cut out. Herbie Faye had nothing to do with the film at all. If you get the Criterion Collection DVD or Blu-ray, listen to the commentary track with the extended version. We have several experts, including a pal of mine, Paul Scrabo, who go through this very in-depth history on the making of the film, and they debunk a lot of the myths that were surrounding it.
So there's just tremendous slapstick sequences, set pieces in this movie, and I love the gas station.
Oh, yeah.
There's two that well, yeah, there's more than two, but there's a few. There's a few that I really love, and I guess I should respond to Mike's question as the Gen Xer of the bunch about this movie. Having suffered through the extended version, I would be very happy to see the normal version, the theatrical release. But I do think it's a movie that you really should see at least on the big screen, even if it's not going to be the super Panavision whatever, because it is definitely a spectacle slapstick, and that's all part and parcel to the screwball nature of the comedy. And I also think there's some interesting socially prescient things. For example, the cops already know they're surveilling all of these characters as everyone's chasing the money, and they're reporting back to Spencer Tracy on their walkie-talkies from their helicopters, but they know everything that these people are doing. They have complete surveillance over them. And Edie Adams and Sid Caesar, they're stuck down in the basement of this hardware store with all this dynamite, and the cops know about it, but they're not going to help them. And these poor souls, they almost off themselves a couple times. And I love Edie Adams. I think she's hilarious. Really funny.
I guess I'll respond to my question now too. We can go around the circle. I like the slapstick. I like the stuff being blown up. I like the plane going through a billboard and just the absurdity of everything. I like the gas station fight and just thinking about how, like, is this all balsa wood? Are people dying? And it's so cartoonish. Like, literally, Jonathan Winters runs through a wall and he leaves behind a Jonathan Winters shaped hole. And I rewound it, and it's really, it's really well done.
It's all a cartoon. It's so cartoon. Yeah, there's lots of tragedy, but no one ever gets hurt.
The place where I don't know if I'm missing it or if it's just so broad is when you got all the characters together and they're all doing their own thing, and they're coming from you can see just coming from decades of comedy. It's a comedy I know by name. Like, I haven't watched your show of shows, So these people there's kind of my first real interaction with them, and it's so many people to be playing off of each other, and then they shuffle them about, and it's such a cool thing in theory, but I was trying to gather what exactly people are playing off each other, who's the straight man in this, what these jokes are, and kind of the epitome of my being confused and thinking it's a generational thing is like, what the hell is Wallace Shawn up to? Because we just cut away into his like 1963 bungalow, and he's doing a thing, and there's like a hot lady doing a thing with like the most dead expression
That's
on
Dick
her
Shawn,
face.
not Wallace Shawn.
Dick Shawn.
Dick Shawn, yeah.
Oh, Wallace Shawn. That's a very different.
Yeah.
So Dick
And that's
Shawn.
and I love that sequence. I love that whole
What the
setup.
hell is
I love how she's got the straight face. She's doing Nico from Velvet Underground. She's got the straight face, and you can draw a direct link from the Revillos, aka the Rosillos, which is a punk band that dressed up kind of sci-fi, and they got their inspiration. You can make the same case for the Cramps. They got their inspiration from that particular couple, and they're just great. I love the setup with the guy. She's dancing, and she just looks dead-eyed serious, and he's just digging it in that beatnik way.
Yeah.
Wearing his swim trunks.
I can't wait.
Dancing.
So this is like
dancing his heart out.
This is like a California joke, you know, kind of one of those things. It's like is everyone in the Midwest being like, California, you know? Yeah, it's pre-hippies or anything. And I read something that said he's a lifeguard, and I was like, I guess that makes sense, but that was not.
Well, and he's the mama's boy. He's Ethel Merman's oh so loving, very very loving son, very loyal, diligent son.
Yeah, so that's my example of, am I not getting this because I'm born, decades and decades after it, or is it just real broad?
As a millennial, too, I think you're going to miss a lot of the humor because back when the film came out, and even for about a decade or so afterwards, whenever somebody would pop up on screen, you would expect the humor from that. For example, when Sid Caesar and Edie Adams are in a taxi, they go to the hardware store. The taxi driver is Leo Gorcey, who was from the Bowery Boys. But if you don't know the Bowery Boys comedy, you have no idea who this strange little man with the squeaky voice is, who's giving them it was $3, I think, was the ride from the airport to the store. And also in the store, Edward Everett Horton is the man who owns the store, but unless you were watching films way back when, you wouldn't know who it was.
Yeah, so I guess that's the one way to put it, is like, and like that's the joke, right?
It is.
The joke is like, oh, it's Rochester.
Yes.
Right? Because he doesn't do anything funny, but if you know that that's him, that's the joke, right?
Well, you recognize him from his voice, and just basically the fact that he's an observer to all of this madness going on. But a lot of the smaller roles, too, I think younger viewers might not appreciate the humor of who was cast in the film or what they were doing in there.
And people like Don Knotts. Don Knotts just has a hilarious face. It's just the fact that Don Knotts is there, you're busting up.
So there's two kind of cameos.
His face is funny.
There's like the Don Knotts cameo where you could have never seen Don Knotts in anything and be like,
right.
That dude's hilarious.
That dude's funny.
And then, like, I knew Buster Keaton was in this movie. I was waiting for Buster Keaton to be in this movie, and then I had to rewind it and look up to see who Buster Keaton was in this movie.
Well, it's funny, with Don Knotts, actually, in the original 4-hour version, he had a lot more footage. If you watch the film today, he's in the scene where he picks up Phil Silvers, who's hitchhiking. Phil Silvers pretends to be a spy being chased by foreign agents. They pull over into a diner, and Don Knotts jumps out of the car, and he's supposed to run to the diner, call CIA for help, and Phil Silvers drives off with the car. Now, in the original 4-hour version, Don Knotts goes into the diner, and there is a line of people waiting for a payphone, and he starts pushing past them, demanding to get to the phone first because it's an emergency. And he starts to get into a physical fight with all these people, including a woman named Barbara Pepper, who was a well-known character actress. I think she was on Petticoat Junction during the 60s. And so if you can imagine a hysterical Don Knotts getting into a slugfest with men and women trying to get to a payphone, unfortunately that footage is nowhere to be found.
It's a real wild thing to me that they just threw this footage away. I know we went over it, but I can't imagine that United Artists, which was founded by artists, would just think that this is not useful. Is this still the Mary Pickford days, or
no? Mary and Chaplin and that they weren't in charge of the studio by that time. Though actually, it's funny. One of the films that you mentioned, United Artists and Chaplin had made a film. He produced it. He didn't direct it. It was A Woman of the Seas. Joseph von Sternberg directed it, and Edna Purviance had appeared in it. And the film was so unsatisfactory they didn't release it, and Chaplin actually destroyed the film on advice of his accountant because as a tax write-off.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's just an asset that burned up.
Yeah, so yeah, the film was never publicly seen. There were a lot of stills of the film. It looked to be a beautiful film, but those are still photos. You have no idea what the actual moving picture was.
Was there something where people didn't want these parts that were not as good to be seen and to get out, where now everyone is clamors for the DVD extras? Is there something about, like, if we cut it out for a reason, we don't want this to surface?
Well, that's how they thought back in the 60s. There was no need to see this footage anymore because the film had been changed for general release, and then it went on to, it was re-released in the late 60s and then went into TV in the 1970s. And people liked the shorter version, so there was no perceived value for the longer version, and the footage that was chopped out.
But
so
I
that
have
was
to
gone.
say, things end up on the cutting room floor for a reason.
Usually, yes.
A lot of this footage, it's not entire scenes. What you can tell from watching this extended cut is they'll chop off the people walking into the scene, the beginning parts, and then the footage will switch into like a higher quality as you're in like the existing print, and you're like, oh, I can see why you.
Yeah, there's a lot of medium shots that aren't really necessary.
It made sense, too. I mean, Paul Scrabo, I think, said to me that most of the cuts were entrances and exits.
Right.
And so if they were able to chop bits in here and bits from there, of course they took out the whole intermission with the police calls going through. Then it was easy enough to squeeze the film down to about roughly 2.5 hour running time.
Phil, you have to tell us where we can get your book.
Well, In Search of Lost Films recently came out. You can find it on Amazon and all the other online book e-commerce sites. My publisher is Bear Manor Media, and you can get it directly from them. It's available in both softcover and hardcover.
And you have a few other books, too.
Yeah, Bear Manor Media had released my last few books, including The Greatest Bad Movies of All Time, the book What If They Lived, which I co-wrote with Rory Aransky, and The History of Independent Cinema.
That's a great one. I love that one.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that's an awesome book. Yeah, The History of Independent Cinema. If you guys are into independent cinema or you want to learn a lot about it, Phil is a great repository of knowledge about independent cinema.
Did you say repository or suppository? Okay.
Oh.
I thought you said book depository.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, this movie came out 10 days before Kennedy was shot.
Whoa!
Whoa.
Wow, there's a political punch for you. I didn't know that.
It did, yes. The film It's a Mad, 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 Mad World came out shortly before the Kennedy assassination, and in many ways the death of the president sort of helped the film because many people were just so depressed in the days afterwards that we had this big comedy film out, so people went there to cheer up.
Yeah, you think Sinatra, who I can only guess is probably offered a role in this, is like, I'm in this movie, The Manchurian Candidate. That's gonna kill at 63. That's my ticket to.
Well, actually, I don't think Sinatra was offered a role in this particular film. He had worked with Stanley Kramer on a film called The Pride and the Passion, which is widely regarded as one of Kramer's least successful films. He also did a film, it was Kramer's first film as a director, Not as a Stranger. He had a supporting role. He was actually very good. He had played, believe it or not, a medical school student.
Well, I have to say, what I felt was missing from this movie, from It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World.
No, one more mad.
Oh, it's a Mad, 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 Mad World.
Correct.
Was Katharine Hepburn. I wish that they had, because Spencer Tracy's talking to his wife, but you never see his wife. And it's a screwball comedy. Come on. Get Katharine Hepburn in the movie. I wanted to see his wife, and I wanted it to be Katharine Hepburn.
Oh, come on. Selma Diamond's perfect as the voice of his wife.
But no, that's the problem. I don't want to just hear
Hepburn
the
Tracy.
voice. I want to see them interact.
She was around for a decade. She was around into when was on Golden Pond, right?
Katharine Hepburn? Yes.
Yeah, that was 30 years later, right?
Oh, yeah.
He died a couple years after this. He looks like he's going to die on the
But
stairs.
Katharine Hepburn also famous for probably the most famous screwball comedy, Bringing Up Baby.
Actually, there was also more of the footage, stuff that was cut out. In the film, Spencer Tracy has these two running telephone feuds, one with his wife, one with his 6'5" daughter who's running away from home. There was actually a third telephone feud with his brother-in-law, played by Maury Amsterdam. And that was in the, I think, 4-hour version, and that got cut out. And just the idea of Spencer Tracy and Maury Amsterdam having a scene together, even though if it was just a telephone scene, to me is just astonishing.
Well, there it is. I want to thank Mr. Phil Hall for coming on the program today. It's been so much fun talking to you about this terrific movie and drinking Dogfish Head Pumpkin Ale with Mr. Mike Lacy. Thank you all for listening. Please subscribe. Tell your friends to subscribe. Click like and do whatever that social media stuff is.
Yeah, if our fans out there, we're not. These aren't just things we say because it's what you say at podcast. Engage, comment, like, subscribe. It helps. Tell anyone you know any way you know, which is a ripoff of Frida Longworth's sign off. But
And remember to turn your cell phones off when you're walking, driving, or watching a movie.
How much will I get paid for this?
Is the beer's not enough?
check.
I have to review my contract.
Actually, we have a check for you. It's in
Wishing.
Santa Rosita. It's
It's under a big W.
It's under a big W. Okay.
Yeah. Good luck with that.